My name is Daniel. September 2016. I've always loved nature, escaping the noise of the city, the endless traffic, and the constant notifications on my phone. Spending a few days surrounded by nothing but the wilderness has always brought me peace. My closest friends, Chris and Mike, feel the same way. Ever since we were kids, we've gone on countless camping trips, always looking for new places to explore. The three of us are very different, but our differences complement each other. Chris is the adventurous one, always pushing to go farther, to dive deeper. Mike is more cautious, avoiding unnecessary risks and preferring to plan everything. I fall somewhere in between. I use my logic, but I also enjoy the rush of adrenaline now and then. Last year, we discovered an old, abandoned hiking trail in Northern California. It was in a remote area, far from any tourist spots. The idea of spending a few days completely cut off from the world sounded perfect. But while we thought nature was the only thing we had to be wary of, we had no idea the real danger would come from something else. Day 1. Everything starts off great. As we drove down the dirt road, the trees grew denser, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. Our phones had lost service miles ago, and the silence was absolute. But instead of feeling uneasy, we felt exhilarated. Once we arrived at our campsite, we wasted no time setting up our tents. We found a small lake nearby, took a swim, built a fire, and cooked dinner. The atmosphere was so peaceful that spending a few days here seemed like the best idea we had ever had. That night, under a sky full of stars, we sat around the fire, reminiscing about past camping trips. At one point, Chris laughed and said, "Looks like we're not getting a scary story this time." If only he had been right. Night 2. The silence of the woods. Around midnight, just as I was drifting off to sleep, a sound outside made my eyes snap open. A small crack, like a twig snapping, then the rustling of leaves. Chris whispered, "Mike, did you hear that?" Mike's voice was tense. "Yeah, what the hell is that?" I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. Mike and Chris followed, stepping out into the cold night air. We shined our flashlights through the trees, scanning the area. Nothing. "Probably just a deer," I said, though deep down I wasn't so sure. None of us slept well that night. Day 3. The man in the woods. The next morning, we decided to go for a hike. As we wandered deeper into the forest, we started noticing strange carvings on the trees, small triangles with a single dot inside. Chris frowned. "Who would put these here?" Mike shrugged. "Probably scouts? Or maybe hunters marking a trail." But when we saw the same symbols on multiple trees, the uneasy feeling in my stomach grew. And then we met him. I first heard footsteps behind us. When I turned, a tall, bearded man was walking toward us, a rifle slung over his shoulder. He wore an old camouflage jacket. "Don't see many people around here," he said, in a deep, rough voice. Chris, always friendly, replied, "We're just camping." The man nodded. "You should be careful. Lots of bears around. People don't realize it, but the woods have their own rules." He told us stories about hunting, tracking animals, and how to stay safe at night. His name, he said, was John. Chris trusted him immediately. Mike remained skeptical. I wasn't sure what to think. He seemed normal enough, but something about him put me on edge. When he offered to join us at our campfire that night, I wanted to decline. But before I could say anything, Chris agreed, and that was our first mistake. The night, the truth revealed. That evening, John returned, sitting by our fire as we talked. At first, everything seemed normal, but after a while, his questions became unsettling. Where do you guys live? Do your families know you're here? Did you tell anyone where you were going? At some point, Chris got up to walk to the lake, and Mike went to his tent. That left just me and John, alone by the fire. That's when I noticed something. As John reached into his pocket, I caught a glimpse of something under his shirt, a necklace with a small key attached. But the key wasn't clean. It was stained with something dark, something that looked like dried blood. A chill ran down my spine. I turned to look at John, and he was already watching me. Our eyes locked. And in that moment, I knew whatever had been watching us these past 2 nights, it wasn't a... Hello, I'm Sam. It's really hard for me to tell you what happened to me in May 2018. It was so terrifying that I still feel that fear every time I close my eyes at night. But I need to tell the whole story. If you ever decide to go camping again, maybe this story will make you think twice. Last summer, the 4 of us decided to go on a big camping adventure. Me, Jamie, Josh, and Eric. We were the typical group of friends who had been spending time together for years, going out every weekend and enjoying life. We had been talking about camping for a long time, but we never found the opportunity. Finally, we decided to camp in a forested area in Northern California. Nothing could stop us. We were excited. At first, everything went smoothly. We set off in Josh's old car, and with some music and conversation, the journey passed quickly. We drove into the depths of the forest early in the morning. The further we went off the road, the quieter it became. No one paid much attention to it, but I was struck by the strange silence of nature. Sometimes even the wind wouldn't blow, and I could feel that everything was hidden there. The place we arrived at was quite isolated, and there were no sounds of other people, even from a distance. We set up our tents and lit a fire. Jamie, as usual, tried to lighten the mood with jokes. Eric, on the other hand, was a bit cautious. "Isn't it strange here?" he asked. "There's no one around, it's so quiet." But Josh and Jamie just laughed and continued having fun, not paying much attention to what he said. The first night was fine. Later on, around midnight, we got up from the campfire to watch the stars and wandered deeper into the forest. Eric refused to join us. "It's too dark. Don't go too far," he warned. But we were here to camp. We should have been brave. We left Eric behind and ventured deeper into the woods. After walking and singing for a while, I suddenly heard a sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I took another step, the sound seemed to be a whisper getting closer. We stopped immediately. Jamie yelled, "Is anyone there?" and looked around. There was nothing, just us and the silence. But something felt off. My mind started racing. "I think we're not alone here," I said, but the others didn't take me seriously. "It's just nature. Maybe it's just an animal," Josh said. But I knew this sound wasn't from an animal. It was a human whisper. As we made our way back to the fire, the eerie silence returned. We sat around the fire when suddenly we heard a loud noise. We all turned our heads but saw nothing. However, a few minutes later, someone screamed. Jamie jumped up, shouting, "Someone is watching me!" We all sprang to our feet, but there was nothing around us. We couldn't see anything for a while, but the fear was so intense that I still remember that night. We spent the night around the fire, but by morning, things had gotten worse. One of our tents was completely gone. Its belongings were scattered around, but the tent itself had vanished as if someone had ripped it from its place. The things were a mess. "Was someone here?" I asked. Eric looked frightened. "I think there's someone with us. I feel like something's not right." Everyone's mood was ruined. But Jamie, still trying to be funny, said, "This isn't scary, it's just nature." But we had started to lose trust in him. No matter how brave we tried to be, something inside us felt fear. By the end of the second day, the noises in the forest became even stranger. It felt like someone was watching us every moment. We had set out to go to the river, but we couldn't make it back. We were so isolated that it felt like time had disappeared. When we decided to head back, we realized the new spot we chose to spend the night was very dark. We could hear something moving around us. Suddenly we heard a noise, but this time it was closer and more disturbing. Josh said, "Let's leave this place. If not now, when will we go?" But we just walked silently. In the darkness of the night, we could hear someone's breath following us. We huddled together and ran toward our tents. We looked outside but couldn't see anyone. However, when we woke up in the morning, what had happened was like a nightmare. One of our tents was gone. There were only scattered belongings left and a sign on the ground. The sign had a handwritten note on it. "Today is your last chance to leave this place." We all stared at the sign in horror. Eric trembled and said, "This can't be real." But everything was too real. Our tent was gone, our belongings had been moved, and that note made all of our fears tangible. We quickly gathered our things and began to run toward the car. We were so scared that we almost forgot our bags. It felt like something was getting closer to us. As we left the forest, we still heard those noises echoing in our ears. We decided not to look back once again as we drove away. That campsite should stay forever behind us. Now, every time I remember those days, something stirs inside me. It was just a campsite. But forgetting that night is impossible. And that note, was it a message for us or a threat? We'll never know. Hello, friends. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 30 years old, and today I'm going to tell you about the most terrifying, unexplainable experience of my life. Even after all these years, the memories refuse to fade. I went through therapy for a long time because of what happened, but I still can't sleep alone at night. Even talking about it sends chills down my spine. The beginning. Journey to Blackwood Forest. In the cold and foggy November of 2008, my two close friends, Scott Harper and Michael Reed, and I decided to go camping in the deep forests of Oregon to fulfill a childhood dream. The area known as Blackwood Forest was once considered sacred land by the native tribes. According to legend, shamans who could speak with spirits lived there. But to us it was just a myth. We thought we were about to embark on a real adventure. That morning, we packed all the necessary camping gear, got into Michael's old but sturdy Jeep, and set off from Portland toward the forest. Along the way, the fog slithered between the trees like a sly serpent. The air was freezing, biting into our bones, but our excitement overshadowed everything else. After about 2 hours of driving, we reached the entrance to Blackwood Forest, but something felt off. The forest was wrapped in an eerie silence. No birds chirped, no wind rustled the leaves, just a deep, suffocating stillness. I felt an unease I couldn't quite explain, but I didn't let my friends see it. Day 1. Camping and the beginning of a sinister night. When we reached our campsite, we set up our tents under the shadow of a massive oak tree. The soil felt strangely soft, as if it had just been dug up. We carefully arranged our tents and then ventured into the forest to gather firewood. As night fell, we sat around the fire chatting and laughing. As the darkness thickened, Michael glanced around uneasily. "It feels like someone is watching us," he whispered. Scott and I tried to joke about it, but when we saw the seriousness in his face, we fell silent. As the night went on, we began to hear strange whispers resembling the wind, but carrying an unnatural clarity. At first, we thought it was just our minds playing tricks on us. But then the words became clear. "Turn back. This place is not yours." We all heard it. We exchanged terrified glances. And at that exact moment, the fire suddenly roared to life, as if gasoline had been poured over it. This wasn't going to be an ordinary camping trip. Danmore. Scott's disappearance. The next morning, we tried to shake off the terror of the previous night and headed to a large stream to fish. We spent the day by the river, but the unease in our hearts never quite faded. That evening, as we returned to our campsite, Scott went into the forest to relieve himself. "Don't go too far," we warned, but he simply waved us off and disappeared into the trees. Minutes passed. Scott didn't return. And then we heard that blood-curdling scream. We ran toward the sound and found him kneeling on the ground, trembling. "I saw them," he whispered. His eyes were pure white, as if his pupils had vanished. His hands were covered in blood. "Who did you see?" we asked. His voice shook as he answered. "I walked up to a huge oak tree. I looked up and there they were, hanging from the branches. Hundreds of figures, draped in pitch-black cloaks. They had no faces, only deep hollow eye sockets. One of them whispered in a hissing voice, 'You defiled our land. Now you belong to us.'" Scott's voice trembled. From that night on, he was never the same again. Escape and the end of the nightmare. We finally decided to leave. At dawn, we packed our belongings and got into the Jeep. But just as we reached the exit, the car suddenly stopped. The engine was running, but the wheels, they weren't touching the ground. And then, at the side of the road, an old woman appeared. "You took the wrong path, children," she said. We were starving and exhausted. When she invited us to her village, we had no choice but to accept. At first glance, the village seemed normal, but during dinner, I noticed something. As I lifted my spoon, everything changed. The people around me vanished. The place where we were sitting turned into a crumbling, rotting ruin. Michael and Scott suddenly started screaming, slamming themselves against the walls. I don't remember what happened next. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital. The truth and the non-believers, bright fluorescent lights burned my eyes. A doctor and 2 police officers stood beside my bed. "Mr. Walker, we found you alone in the forest. Where are your friends?" My throat was dry. Struggling to speak, I whispered, "Scott and Michael. They disappeared. The village. The voices." The officers exchanged glances. One of them sighed. "Mr. Walker, Blackwood Forest has been abandoned for years. There is no village, no settlement. We searched for your friends, but found no trace of them." The doctor spoke softly. "You've experienced severe trauma. After being lost in the forest for so long without food or water, it's possible that you hallucinated. But I knew the truth. The whispers, they were still there. The officers and the doctor left the room. But just as the door closed, I heard something. Even though I was alone in the room, a voice whispered directly into my ear, "We are watching you."